The second thing, actually, just on relationships, the reason, did you know $13 trillion has been given to Africa over the last 20 years to help the incredible poverty that they're experiencing? $13 trillion. What has it done? What's it done, Becca? Not very much. $13 trillion. And part of the reason it's not done much is because of the corruption, but part of it is because as well, what happens is if you give somebody some rice and a meal, it's good for them for that day, but you've got to do the same the next day. You see, we don't want to create relationships of dependence, we want to create relationships of empowerment. And there's a huge difference. So when we give a meal to somebody, that's great. But if we teach them how to get a job, if we empower them to show them how they might be able to start earning a living themselves, we do so much more. The reason that $13 trillion hasn't done anything is because they've just given rice, and then they've given more rice, and they've given this, and they've given that. They haven't empowered community. If we're going to seriously tackle poverty in the 21st century, which is I think what you're serious about, we've got to make relationships that aren't just people dependent on us, but actually we empower people. And that's a really difficult thing to do, okay? And it's not something that you learn to do overnight. It's something that comes with time. As you begin to practice a life of justice, as you begin to practice getting into those relationships that transform people, you'll begin to see how you can empower people. We were recently in a slum in Mumbai where Oasis is working. And this is great, okay? So their desire is, they went in 2007. I think they went in 2007. They went to this slum that had no sanitation. It had, and when I say no sanitation, it's a horrific thing. No running water, no electricity. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Just insane. And Oasis went there and they said, by 2011, we want to have no point staff in this community. We want to make sure that nobody's employed by Oasis to be in this community. Now that sounds like a really crazy thing, like a horrible thing to do. But the reason is because what they wanted to do was they wanted to empower people in that community to see how they can transform that slum. And actually what's happened is that slum's been transformed not because Oasis has gone in and has done something, but because Oasis has gone in and has stirred the people up. It's trained people. It's created relationships, not of dependence, but of empowerment. And some of the things that they've done, for example, so much debt can come from the fact that people are in so much poverty they want to borrow money. So they borrow money from the only person that they know who will do it for them. And this person will lend them money. And the amount that they charge them interest is ridiculous. They will never pay that debt off. And that just becomes a cycle of poverty for them. And so what Oasis did was they trained some people in banking, and they trained some people to set up basically their own bank. And so now you have groups of 20 women, and it is mostly women, who they come and they start saving money, giving them 10 rupees, 20 rupees. And they put in so much money. And then if somebody in that group wants to borrow some money, maybe there's a funeral, maybe something's terrible's happened, maybe they want to buy something to be able to give them, like an altar or something so that they can have a job. They can borrow that money, and the interest rate is like 1%, something like that, which is nothing. And then they pay it back slowly. That's about a relationship of empowerment. Another thing they've done there actually, which is fascinating, is businesses have come along and they've realised if they get rid of some of the slum, they can make a fortune out of it. Because land is so expensive in Mumbai, right? So they've come along and think, if we just give some people in the slum like an okay house, we'll take their space and we'll make a fortune from it. And so, obviously, when you have nothing and someone offers you a house, what do you say? Yeah, you're going to take it, right? So they've taken it, but actually Oasis has worked with them. These houses didn't have windows. These houses weren't going to have water again. They weren't going to have electricity. It was just literally a concrete building with a small room in it, and that was it. And so what Oasis did was they began to advocate on their behalf and say, you need to get together and you need to say, this isn't good enough. We want a community building. This isn't good enough. We want electricity. This isn't good enough. We want windows so that we've got light coming through our And you see what happens is a relationship of empowerment begins to change a community. Shatish, those of you anybody meet Shatish? Yeah. Shatish, not Shatish here. Anyone meet him? What a lovely guy. Shatish, who some of you play football with. The great thing about him is he lives in Dilly-Gunther, which is a very poor community. I wouldn't call it a slum community, but a very poor community, and there are some communities around there. But what Oasis did was Oasis worked with him, and they empowered him, and through empowering him, he is able to change so much more than anybody who works for Oasis is able to, because he lives in that community. It's about relationships of empowerment, and when we make those relationships of empowerment, we can really make a significant difference. Number 2. Notice what the Great Commission says. All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me, therefore, go. Go and make disciples. It doesn't say, therefore, sit in your church and wait for disciples to come along, and hopefully they will. Does it? It says, therefore, go. And what we're called to do as a church, if your individual response, if the most important thing you can do as an individual is make relationships, the most important thing we can do as a church is be the type of church that says we're going to go, rather than saying, come to us. And there is a huge difference between a go-to church and a come-to church. A go-to church says, I'm going to get involved in the government house. I'm going to make sure that other churches are getting involved in it. And I'm going to take the good news out of my church and I'm going to take it to those people. And I'm going to sit with them and I'm going to play with them once a week. And we're going to create church together. Why shouldn't they have church? Why can't they be church together? And why can't you be church with them? And so you build almost in that government house. And they hate it if I was saying this. But you sit there and you begin to actually disciple those children. You begin to give them hope. You begin to hang out with them. You begin to wash their feet and clothe them. And as you do that, you begin to be church. And it's so much better than saying to them, you know, is it alright if we take them out once a week and bring them to our church? Can you imagine? Can you imagine some of these people coming to our churches straight off? It would be very difficult. You see, we want people to come to our church, sing our songs, we want people to sit in our chairs, we want people to listen to our sermons. They're not going to. We've got to wake up and we've got to go to people. I used to work with teenagers who were in gangs. We used to stand up the front in our church and sing soft rock, and then expect them to come into our church. Okay, they come in and it's just a time warp. We've gone back 30 years. They could not cope with it. They didn't know what to do. So what we decided to do was create a radio station. We made a radio station and we said, what music do you like? Hip hop. R&B. Oh, great. Okay. Matt Raymond? No? Tim Hughes? You can't look at you like you're from another planet, you know? So we said, let's create a radio station. So we created this radio station, and kids would come and they'd play their music, they'd sing songs, they'd record their albums in our music studio, they'd put music out onto the airwaves. It was terrible. I mean, it was actually awful. I used to, we used to have phone-ins. And we put it on the air, and they said, all these kids really excited to be on the radio. Phone in on 0208 981, and to answer this question, they'd ask a question. Nobody was listening to our radio, so nobody would ring up. So I'd go into the back office and I'd get my mobile phone and I'd go, what's going on? Yeah, I just want to say, I think I've already answered your question there. And then about 10 minutes later, when they did it again, I go, hello, I just want to answer the question that you asked. Now I've got all these different voices, and we had a great time. And as we began to have a great time, I began to make relationships with some of these young people, and we began to discover Christ together. I began to be able to introduce them to who Jesus was, not because I was preaching at them, but because I was in relationship with them.